Part 96. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 965. Some places will have obvious off-peak and peak tourist seasons. These places are basically famous for their beautiful scenery, which changes with the four seasons. Their four seasons throughout the year are like those of the ancient Qing dynasty. Tourists will always choose the last place after dressing up. Come enjoy it when it is beautiful, but other places rely on scenic spots and historic sites, so the impact of seasons on the off-peak and peak tourist seasons is not obvious. After all, a stone is still a stone, a sculpture is still a sculpture, a pagoda is still a pagoda. Clay figurines, still clay figurines. For thousands of years, not much has changed. Xi'an is a city with a very ancient charm. For the monk, this place carries many of his own memories. Although he has traveled far and wide, this is the root of the monk after all. It's a pity that the last blood corpse incident caused many things to be erased by the broadcast. The roots of the monk can no longer be found and are not included in any records. In this regard, the monk is not too sad. For the monk, the best destination is to come and go in vain. The power of broadcast can erase everything, but it is in line with the monk's aesthetic view of death and ending. At least, that's what the monk thought. Among the crowds, the monk was walking alone holding a Buddhist bead. People around him noticed him from time to time, but they didn't pay too much attention to him. They always felt that the monk looked a little unusual, but after a second look, they felt that there was nothing special about him. Looking at the familiar ancient city wall and smelling the aroma of food coming from all around, the monk always had a smile on his face. When he was a child, his master often brought him here to sneak snacks, and so did his senior brothers. It's a pity that they are no longer here. Unfortunately, they can't be found. The monk sighed twice. Nowadays, in people's common perception, the most prosperous places in China are nothing more than the Yangtze River Delta and the Pearl River Delta. In fact, the political, economic and cultural center of China was not there in the past. Xi'an began from the Zhou dynasty. Through the Qin, Han, Sui, and Tang dynasties, it was a capital city. In the early years, Jiangnan was actually an uncivilized land full of barbarians and Di people. The real development did not begin until the establishment of the Wu kingdom during the Three Kingdoms period, and then after the Wei, Jin, southern and northern dynasties, the economic and the cultural center began to shift to the south. Of course, there is also Henan, which is the most hurt by hackers now. Back then, it was almost synonymous with the Central Plains. The people in Henan at that time had the same mentality towards outsiders as the people in Beijing now. The monks did not come back specially to visit their relatives. The Buddha traveled around, and in the end he took away a ray of merit and virtue to prepare for a breakthrough, let alone the monks. Their state, combined with the current environment, is truly leisurely. Is really a luxury product. Having stayed at the senior level for too long, the monk felt powerless too many times. Especially after Fatty Subai and Buddha around him advanced, this feeling of powerlessness began to become stronger and stronger. But the monk endured it until the canal was completed, leaving only water, and this water is in the ancient city of Xi'an. As he walked, a tall tower appeared in front of the monk. This was the Big Wild Goose Pagoda, which is also one of the landmark buildings in Xi'an. The monk did not stop under the Big Wild Goose Pagoda, but continued walking northeast. Not far away, he arrived at this place. The place he is coming to is Qinglong Temple. There are many tourists in Qinglong Temple, and the incense is very strong. After all, if you look closely, this is the ancestral home of Buddhist Tantric Buddhism. More than 1,000 years ago, Japan's master Kukai accompanied the Tang envoy to the Tang dynasty and entered Qinglong Temple to worship under Master Huiguo. Buddhism, after Master Keiko passed away, monk Kukai returned to Japan and founded the Shinjin sect, which is considered one of the mainstream Buddhist sects in Japan today. The monk looked at the endless stream of tourists coming in and out around him, with a wry smile on his face. Sometimes, 100 years is enough to change things, not to mention that Qinglong Temple has a history of more than 1,000 years. In fact, the temple in front of him is Qinglong Temple has nothing to do with the real Qinglong Temple in history. During the reign of Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty, the imperial court massacred Buddhism. Qinglong Temple suffered a military disaster and was directly razed. The current Qinglong Temple is just rebuilt on the site by future generations. The monk still stood at the door and did not go in. If he encountered a wandering monk standing at the door of his house in some quiet temples in the mountains, he would definitely go up and ask if he needed any help. But in this current commercial atmosphere, the monk stood at the door for almost an hour, and still no monk came out to ask him. With the character of a monk, he would naturally not lament that people's hearts are not as good as the world has become. In fact, the Qinglong Temple in front of him was not the Qinglong Temple he wanted to go to. He's waiting here. Slowly. With the monk as the center of the circle, the figures of the surrounding tourists began to become more and more blurred, and then, it seemed that only the monk and the Qinglong Temple were left in the world. The Buddhist beads in the monk's hand began to glow faintly at this time. This string of Buddhist beads was one of the monk's most important magical instruments. The fat man once curiously asked the monk about the origin of this magical instrument. The monk's answer was simple: his masters of past generations, masters of masters, and masters of masters, passed away and strung the relics one by one to become this string of beads. As the light of the Buddha beads continued to flash, the surrounding area also became quiet. The monk closed his eyes, clasped his hands together, and began to recite the Heart Sutra. After such a long period of forbearance and preparation, now there is only the last step left. To say he is not excited would be false, but above the excitement, there is something extra. A sense of indifference. Buddhism teaches people not to fight and to abandon the 7 emotions and 6 desires. However, this can be done in the real world, but in the story world, it cannot be done this way. The fight, the calculation, has been started a long time ago. When he saw that the gods and Buddhas in the sky could be broadcast and treated as NPCs in the story world in large quantities, the monk no longer looked at it. The Buddha of nothingness is actually the same as Lord Buddha. When they practice Buddhism, they are not cultivating any Buddha that is recognized by people, but they are cultivating themselves as a Buddha. Amitabha, you monk, you have been standing here for a long time. Do you want to go into the temple and have some vegetarian food? A clear child's voice came from beside the monk. The monk slowly opened his eyes and saw the young novice standing next to him. The young novice's tone was a little condescending. He thought he had met many monks who came to eat and drink. Of course, the Qinglong Temple family has a great business and would not be short of food to take care of the Buddhist monks. Generally speaking, 3 meals are given to them. If you are a virtuous eminent monk, you can talk about Buddhism with the masters in the temple. It is not impossible to stay and worship in Qinglong Temple when the time comes. And those monks who are not popular after enjoying 3 fast meals can also nope me and continue to eat and drink here with a shy face. Okay, the monk replied simply. Follow me. The little novice walked in front carrying the broom, and the monk followed behind. The temple is still the same temple, but it has an extra touch of grandeur, and it also shows the heritage that should belong to it but has long been worn away and invisible in the wave of commercialization in later generations. After entering the main gate, he turned a corner and saw a dozen or so monks in luxurious clothes sitting on the white jade railing in front of him. Some of these monks were sitting upright and meticulous, some were calm and composed as if they were born in heaven, and some were eclectic and casual. The statues of various Buddhas in the temples of later generations are exactly like those in later generations. In the middle, there is a solemn monk sitting, who is vaguely the head of the monks. The other monks are performing discipleship rituals in front of him. Don't look too much. Come with me. You've already eaten your vegetarian meal early. You can come and go wherever you want. Those masters and uncles are not something we can disturb, the little novice monk reminded Chi Lv. Chi Lu seemed not to have heard anything and still stood there, looking at the masters on the lotus jade platform. The little novice was a little anxious, and stretched out his hand to tug the monk's sleeves a few times. How can you, a monk, be so ignorant? Why don't you come with me? But at this moment, the monk who was held up by the stars suddenly laughed loudly, stood up, and pointed at the dignified and meticulous monk beside him. Hui Ying, he must be your junior. Returning to master, it should be that the Buddhist beads in his hand are also strung with the relics of his disciples, and the relics of his great disciple are also strung on them. Monk Huiying is one of the famous monks in history, so the master he calls is naturally Monk Huiguo. Historically, Monk Huiguo served as the national preceptor of Dezong, Dezong, and Shenzong of the Tang dynasty. He was highly respected. He was also very smart at a young age, and his Buddhist attainments were beyond ordinary people. If his life were recorded, it would be more buggy than the protagonist of later novels. The absolute pride of heaven, the leader of Buddhism. More importantly, each of his disciples is an accomplished monk. The dark-skinned and slightly short monk sitting at the end of the table is probably the monk Kyokai who founded the Shingon sect in Japan. At this time, he was still studying Buddhism at Qinglong Temple. At this time, the Tang dynasty was the center of the world, and foreign friends did not receive the same special treatment as in later generations. Even if they lost a bicycle or a mobile phone, they would be treated with special treatment and dealt with all their strength. In addition, Monk Huiguo's disciples were all great virtuous monks in the future. Therefore, in the future, Monk Kyokai, who will be the successor of the Shingon sect, can only accompany the last one here. However, after hearing the conversation between Master Huiguo and senior brother Huiying, Monk Kyokai showed a look of surprise on his face. Then he looked at the faces of the senior brothers around him who looked calm, as if there was nothing unexpected, and he felt even more embarrassed. Sure enough, my level is still too low. In fact, it's no wonder that Monk Kyokai. Normal people would be surprised when suddenly faced with this sentence. Aren't you still alive? How could you point at a young monk and say that the beads in his hand have the relics of himself, and his disciples strung on them? Chi Lu clasped his hands together, bowed solemnly to the monks Huiguo and Huiying above him and said, Disciple Kilu, pay homage to our great uncle. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiao Long. Chapter 966. Disciple Kilu, pay homage to our great uncle. Ha 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 ha. Monk Huiying burst out laughing immediately after Kilu paid his respects. At this moment, he looked completely different from his previous stereotype. The little novice monk was inexplicably horrified at this time. He was an orphan adopted by Qinglong Temple since he was a child. As far back as he could remember, he had never seen Master Huiying's uncle be so dissolute. You must know that Huiying Uncle Ying Shi has always been the most unsmiling and serious person among all his uncles. He has extremely strict standards in everything he says and does. However, the young novice also knew that the monk he had brought in was not here to beg for alms. At that moment, he had to stick out his tongue and retreat. How about it, fellow juniors, my lineage is the most promising. Monk Huiying was very happy, sincerely happy. A quarter of an hour ago, Master Huiguo, Monk Huiguo, had a chat with all the Dharma disciples. They all just made a promise, that is, after he passes away, he will instruct his disciples to connect his relics to represent each other. It is passed down from generation to generation. Of course, this does not refer to children but to disciples, and the disciples of future generations are told that if they have meritorious deeds and profound Buddhist teachings, they can go to the vicinity of Qinglong Temple, hold the relics of past generations and recite sutras, and they will naturally be received and guided come in. After the agreement was reached, Master led the disciples to arrange a reception formation. After a short while, someone came, and there was only one person. As for whether there would be a second one in the future, there will never be a third person, because all future generations of disciples who are qualified to come will appear here at the same time, no matter in the future era or in any age. But now, there is only Kilu, and the largest relic of the Buddha bead held by Kilu belongs to monk Huiying, so naturally monk Huiying wins. This method is nothing more than a game played by Master Huiguo and the disciples. In short, this game is equivalent to everyone being able to confirm whether a space-time machine will appear in the future. You only need to write the current time, year, month, day, or even down to minutes and seconds, on a piece of paper, treat it as a family heirloom, and pass it on to your son, and then instruct your son to pass it on to his future grandson. According to Yugong's instructions, in other words, their descendants are infinitely poor, and he instructs future generations to come to the time recorded on the note to meet their ancestors if time machines become as popular as television sets. If there really is a time machine in the future, regardless of unexpected conditions such as your having no descendants or your unfilial descendants completely ignoring your family's inheritance and training, then after you write this note, in one of your dozens of lifetimes or descendants of hundreds of generations will suddenly pop up and shout to you, "Ancestor." If nothing happens when you finish writing this note, it means that the time machine will not be invented. Monk Huiguo may have really been bored, so he played this game with the disciples under him, and they succeeded. This can also explain from the side how unfaithful Monk Huiguo is and the disciples around him. Our Buddha Dharma is also so profound. Of course, this bet is a bit big and a bit mysterious. Most people really can't play it. In fact, if Chi LV hadn't become an audience, he would still not be able to come here even if he was an enlightened monk and respected by others in the secular world. However, as the direct master of the Kilu lineage, monk Huiying was extremely happy at this time. It is true that the monk has no heirs, but his disciples who teach the Dharma are equivalent to his heirs, or even closer than his heirs. After all, heirs, I am just passing on your bloodline, and my disciples are passing on your traditions and spirit. Monk Huiying was so rude because he learned from the arrival of Chi LV that some of his disciples and grandsons would still be able to reach where they are now. The other masters present could only look at Monk Huiying with envy at this time. They did not think that the senior brother's performance was anything wrong. If it were them, they might be happier than the senior brother. At this time, Monk Huiguo gently stretched out his hand and pressed down. Monk Huiying immediately stopped smiling, sat cross-legged again, and returned to the solemn state of Dharma. Amitabha, people are here, but they shouldn't ask questions. Don't ask. Otherwise, the secret of heaven will be revealed, and there will be a big disaster. Monk Huiguo reminded that their game can be said to go beyond common sense. It is equivalent to pulling a future person into the artistic conception of this picture in ancient times. If you ask something that you shouldn't ask, such as how many years are left in the Tang dynasty Guozo? Who is the next generation of prince? This is the most direct way to leak the secret, and it will definitely be punished by God. But if it's just ordinary communication, it doesn't matter. After all, Buddhism is immeasurable, and the immeasurable here also means ignoring time and space. Kilo slowly walked onto the white jade lotus platform. Many of the monks present at this time were the ancestors worshipped by Buddhism in the future, and this monk Huiguo was even more legendary. His Buddha roots appeared when he was young, and he studied under many eminent monks. After he became an adult, he integrated what he learned from other schools, created his own lineage, and founded a sect. It is a pity that when Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty massacred Buddhism, Qinglong Temple was destroyed by a military disaster. The most influential person in later generations became the monk Kukai, who returned to Japan and founded the Shinjin sect. Come, sit down, drink tea and talk about Buddhism with me, wouldn't it be nice, a monk said from the side. He should also be Kilu's master and uncle. It's very true, you must not have any worries about your seniority. If you can come here to meet us, your attainments in Buddhism are definitely not inferior to ours. The Buddhist Dharma is immeasurable, and those who have achieved it come first. If you are entangled in your seniority, wouldn't you be falling behind? Take a ride, the monk, who was sitting casually, said to Chi Lv. Monk Kilu nodded slightly, but still did not take his seat. Monk Huiguo calmly took a sip of tea at this time. Seeing that the disciples under him invited him several times, even Monk Huiying, the direct ancestor, invited the young monk who was attracted by his formation. But still unwilling to take a seat. Is something wrong? Monk Huiguo asked. If you don't want to sit down, something is naturally wrong. When the master opened his mouth to ask questions, the disciples naturally did not dare to interrupt, but quietly waited for Chi Lv's answer. Of course, when you ask this question, it actually means another layer of meaning. If the descendant monk who was brought here really came here because of something, then things are not that simple. This means that this descendant monk actually came here. He could have come a long time ago, but he waited until he had something to ask for. Although they didn't actually wait for this, because no matter when Kilu decided to come, Kilu would appear directly outside the gate of Qinglong Temple after they arranged the formation. But we are all eminent monks in this world, not only have profound Buddhist cultivation, but also have very peaceful minds, so I feel that this generation of monks is really a little too deliberate. This feeling kind of ruins the atmosphere. If a descendant monk is brought in to prove that there is a successor to the Qinglong Temple inheritance, it would be an elegant and happy event. Wouldn't it be nice for everyone to sit down and discuss Buddhism, referring to the past and the present? Looking at the world, what else is more elegant and interesting than this? Chi Lu breathed out gently, put his hands together again and saluted the masters sitting in front of him, and said at the same time, "This disciple is here to ask for something to borrow from the masters." It's tacky." The monk with a free and easy posture smiled and waved his hand. "Whatever you need, I promise you. At worst, I will find an inaccessible place, bury the object, and then decorate it. You can get the formation yourself after 1,000 years. It's very, very good, so good," another eminent monk agreed. However, Monk Huiguo glanced at Kilu calmly and asked, "What do you want?" "I want to borrow the Dharmakaya cultivation abilities of all the masters, and I want to borrow the luck of Qinglong Temple." Chi Lu directly said what he wanted. For a time, the whole place was silent. Monk Kukai, who was sitting at the end of the table, accidentally spilled the tea in his hand. "How is this going? Why is the painting style so different from what I imagined? In fact, it's very different." Presumptuous, Monk Huiying immediately pointed at Kilu and yelled, "Deceive the teacher and destroy the ancestors. Deceive the teacher and destroy the ancestors." Monk Huiying is the direct ancestor of Kilu. The appearance of Kilu just now has earned him a lot of face in front of his brothers. But what Kilu just said made him wish that Kilu had not appeared at all. What kind of face is this? This is to make him a laughing stock in the eyes of his brothers. At the same time, with Master sitting here, wouldn't it make Master think that his nature is bad? Otherwise, how could there be such a rebellious descendant who deceived his master and destroyed his ancestors? Monk Huiguo raised his head slightly and didn't seem too surprised. He simply commented in 2 words, "Interesting." "Yes, it's interesting. I played a game with my disciples, and actually recruited a descendant of the monk. Not only did this monk actually use your Dharma body cultivation, but also the luck of Qinglong Temple. This is really a series of twists and turns." The eminent monk with a free and easy attitude stood up at this time, looked at Kilu and said, "What a big tone. You said you wanted to use us to cultivate Dharmakaya. You said you wanted to take away the luck of Qinglong Temple. Do you really think that I am? Why don't you wait until your master and uncles are all a bunch of losers? Amitabha, these rebellious disciples speak arrogant words, forget their teachings, deceive their masters and destroy their ancestors. This poor monk should see how capable he is of taking our Dharma body. Haha, senior brother Huiying, don't blame junior brother for not giving you the Buddha's face. It's better not to give up such traitors. Today, junior brother, I will help senior brother clean up your family. The appearance of this person is really a shame to our Qinglong temple. Traitor. Today the poor monk will personally suppress you here. From the past to the present, the souls will be divided. Qinglong temple will be with you, Qinglong temple will be defeated, and you will perish. Monk Huiying was obviously very angry. Killer, don't you want to seize the luck of Qinglong temple? Well, he, the master, will personally suppress Killer here and let him live and die with Qinglong temple. Amitabha, faced with the excitement of this group of masters, monk Kilo seemed very calm. Also, he no longer believed in the gods and Buddhas in the sky. The matter of bullying his master and destroying his ancestors was not a problem for such a sinister monk. There was too much pressure, so he just said calmly, "My disciple has a close friend. He has a saying that I like very much and want to give it to all the masters." Everyone fell silent, waiting to hear Kilv's next words. A smile appeared on Kilo's lips and he said seriously, "Come on, let's hurt each other." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 967. More than 1,000 years ago, monk Huiguo, the imperial master of the dynasty, played a game with his descendants while drinking tea and admiring flowers. The nature of the game was a bit like the ancient literati who played pot throwing or recited poems when they got into the mood while drinking. But monk Huiguo and others brought in a descendant from 1,000 years later. And the monk got straight to the point and told the purpose of his visit. I can use it to cultivate my body through the Dharma body of all the masters, and I can also use it to use the luck of Qinglong temple. At this time, the cherry blossoms are falling in Qinglong temple, and the scenery is really pleasant. The artistic conception of falling cherry blossoms and the simple Zen sound of Qinglong temple are combined to give people an unreal feeling like a dream. Seeing the excitement among the disciples under him, monk Huiguo smiled and asked lightly, "Are these cherry blossoms beautiful?" Monk Huiguo's question at this time was like suddenly running out and asking between the two armies during a battle, "What are you having for dinner today?" But because of the status of Master Huiguo, all the disciples immediately stopped talking. After all, the master is here, everything is decided by the master, and they also began to think in their hearts why the master suddenly asked the Sakura. Buddhists like to talk sharply and make people feel unconsciously powerful. In fact, every religion needs a layer of mystery to give outside believers a hazy look. This is like an emperor. He always likes to constantly emphasize that he is the emperor and the divine right of kings, but monk Huiguo is not an ordinary person. Looking at the monk Kukai who can only sit at the bottom of his seat now, he returned to Japan and founded the Shinjin section. It can be seen that he and his disciples, how terrible are their attainments in Buddhism. If Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty had not tried to exterminate Buddhism, causing the ancestral temple of Qinglong temple to suffer military disasters, and many of his disciples' lives had been bumpy, then these eminent monks on the white jade lotus throne might have been able to elevate Buddhism to a new level. Such a virtuous and eminent monk would not talk nonsense. Chi Lv heard this, thought for a moment, and immediately said, "Thousands of years later, Qinglong temple is still there, and the cherry blossoms in Qinglong temple are still there. But thousands of years later, Qinglong temple is no longer there, and neither are the cherry blossoms in Qinglong temple. Zen language Jifeng plays with an artistic conception. In fact, there are many stories about eminent monks discussing Buddhism in ancient China. What they discussed was Buddhism, but it can also be seen as a confrontation of outlook on life and worldview. Such eminent monks can actually be regarded as thinkers and philosophers. They are nothing more than covering up a layer of Buddha's skin to discuss, who am I? Where did I come from, and where will I go? Killed monk is also very simple. It seems contradictory, but it is not contradictory. Monk Huiguo passed away in the first year of Yongzhen. 40 years later, during the Huichang period of Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty, a large-scale extermination of Buddhism began. Qinglong Temple had long been burned to the ground. Like the Lifeng Pagoda in Westlake, only a few remaining foundations were left. To be precise, there are only a few broken stones left. In fact, it was not only the extermination of Buddhism during the reign of Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty. Qinglong Temple was built and destroyed in many subsequent dynasties. In the end, after the founding of the People's Republic of China, archaeological researchers found the location of the Qinglong Temple ruins after years of archaeological excavations, and the country rebuilt it. Qinggreaji Temple, and because Shinjin sect has a great influence in Japan, when the temple was rebuilt, donations from Japan were received. Every year, many Japanese tourists and believers come here to worship. As for the cherry blossoms in Qinglong Temple seen by Qilu at this time, they are not the kind of cherry blossoms in Qinglong Temple in later generations. When people of later generations visit Qinglong Temple, they can see that the cherry blossoms in Qinglong Temple are very beautiful, but these cherry blossoms are from the early 2000th century. At that time, Qinglong Temple officials specially imported it from Japan. Although cherry blossoms originated in the Himalayas, Japanese cherry blossoms were also introduced from China. There are records of planting cherry blossoms as ornamental plants in the palaces of the Qin and Han dynasties. However, after many years of cultivation, cherry blossoms have evolved into many varieties. Later generations of people, the cherry blossoms we often talk about refer specifically to Japanese cherry blossoms. In other words, the cherry blossoms in Qinggreaji Temple in later generations are actually different from the cherry blossoms in Qinggreaji Temple 1,000 years ago. This is the answer of Qilu. Qinglong Temple is still Qinglong Temple, the cherry blossoms are still cherry blossoms, and Qinglong Temple is no longer Qinglong Temple, and the cherry blossoms are no longer cherry blossoms. When Monk Huiguo heard Qilu's answer, he sighed and shook his head, as if he was a little unmotivated. The world is a circle. The purpose of cultivating Buddhism is to get out of this circle. But who knows that there is a bigger one outside? Lock up. At the same time, Monk Huiguo raised his head and looked at the sky. There should be a bigger circle there. You are the successor of my tantric section. As a successor, you should inherit the tradition of my Qinglong Temple, and you should inherit the destiny of my Qinglong Temple. These are the mantles you deserve. Hearing what their master said, all the disciples felt awe-inspiring. No one dared to disobey the master and say the word no at this time. Besides, what the master said was indeed correct. Isn't that what it means to inherit the mantle? Therefore, even if this young man says something to deceive his master and destroy his ancestors, there seems to be nothing wrong with him. However, after 1,000 years, we have passed away long ago, but now, we are still here. If you want to get it, come and get it if you have the ability. If you win, take it. When Qilu heard this, there was a flash of light in his eyes, and then he asked, "May I ask, Master, what is the comparison?" Sitting in meditation, talking about Buddhism and martial arts, Monk Huiguo replied, "I will not participate. My disciples will select 3 people to compete with you. You need to win them all. Otherwise, not only will you not be able to take away what you want, but also you can't even go back. Do you think that I don't have the courage and confidence? Can you try to change your life against the odds?" Monk Huiguo's eyes were as bright as fire. When he said the last words, Kilo felt as if the wind around him had stopped. Indeed, with such a stunning Buddhist prodigy, Kilo didn't believe that he was responsible for the catastrophe of Buddhism only half a century later. I don't know anything, and I don't believe that the other party really doesn't have the ability to try to change his destiny. Yes, Chi-Lu clasped his hands together and agreed. Since the master has set the rules, the disciples below him naturally had no objection at all. At that moment, a master with a stern face stood up and clasped his hands in front of Chi-Lev. Although he looked at Chi-Lv, he did not say a word, as if from Kilv to now, I have never heard this master say a word. The master, after saluting, sat cross-legged and continued to stare at the Chi-Lv with a burning gaze. Chi-Lv also put his hands together and sat cross-legged. He guessed who this master was. He should be Master Huiz, who specialized in closed-mouth meditation. Shun Kao Chan, also known as stop words or forbidden words, is a Buddhist term that refers to prohibiting oneself from speaking in order to reduce one's verbal karma, eliminate sins and avoid disasters, and reduce one's own sinful karma. It is said that Master Huiz started practicing closed-mouth meditation at the age of 5, and until now, he has not uttered a word. He was not mute, no, to be precise, even a mute could scream, but he had never really made any sound. If he compares himself with me in Zazen, he has chosen the right person. Chi-Lu's eyes did not evade at all, and he looked at one of his masters. Zazen is the basic skill of ancient monks. If you really want to compete, you can actually change the environment. For example, you can sit on a plum blossom pile to meditate, or compete in the ice and snow, or under the scorching sun day. In this way, the difficulty will be increased, and the results of the competition will be better. Come out soon. And when the eyes of Master Kilo and Huiz met, Kilo felt that the scene around him suddenly changed, from the colorful inner courtyard of Qinglong Temple to a terrifying Shura field of rolling lava. It seems that even the terrifying temperature of the surroundings is exactly the same, and it is almost a completely intuitive feeling. But Monk Kilo did not move at all, and still looked at Master Huiz calmly. The stories broadcast on the radio were full of wonders, and Kilo had already experienced them, or in other words, he had seen them too much and was no longer afraid. There was a hint of admiration in Master Huiz's eyes. Immediately, the surrounding scene changed again. Buddha has 3,000 realms, and there are countless worlds big and small in the realm. Therefore, there are countless scenes of terror, demons, and visions that disturb people's hearts. Huizi then the master is equivalent to leading the Kilo monks to experience the past one after another, but the Kilo remains unchanged. After almost a quarter of an hour, Chi-Lu's eyes narrowed. The other party had taken him to visit so many places, and it was his turn. Next moment, the scene changed, and the scene around the two of them turned into a small street from the future. When Kilo brought Master Huinorai into his illusion, Master Huiguo reached out in advance to pick up a cherry blossom petal and threw it to Monk Kukai, who was sitting at the end of the table. Immediately, Monk Kukai only saw cherry blossom petals in front of his eyes, but he could not see the person sitting in meditation at this time. Picture. Monk Kukai remained motionless. Since the petals were thrown by his master, he naturally did not dare to move, but he felt a little disappointed in his heart. Why could the fellow seniors see it but not himself? When the other masters saw Chi-Lv bringing Master Huiz into that scene, their faces showed a look of surprise. Even if they were all eminent monks in the world, they could go to Abi hell, the underworld of the underworld, without changing color, but Chi-Lv institute, the scene of the world created after 1,000 years, still surprised them. As for why Master didn't let Kukai see this, some people can understand it clearly, and some people haven't. The picture kept changing, showing pictures of Kilo with his master when he was a child, and pictures with his senior brothers. It seemed that the PPT was playing from the time when Kilo became a monk until he became an adult. Although everything in later generations is a bit surprising, Master Huas, who has been practicing closed-mouth meditation for 30 years, remains unchanged. Everything is ultimately false, even if it changes in all kinds of ways, it is all false. But the next moment, suddenly, the screen started to turn upside down. It was still the same scene that had appeared before, but only Killa was left in the scene, and all the senior brothers and masters of Killa who had appeared in the scene were all gone. This is not simply missing. This is a erasure. Master Huai seemed to see something that shocked his heart. His palms began to tremble. Then he stood up and took a few steps back. The look of panic on his face was very clear. Even the other masters who were watching, except Monk Kukai, showed frightened expressions at the same time. Monk Huiguo calmly took a sip of tea and sighed. Qi Lu spread his hands, lowered his legs, and then stood up. The surrounding scenes also disappeared, as if he had returned to the white jade lotus seed. First round. He won. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 968. Master Huanorai, who had practiced closed-mouth meditation for 30 years, lost. However, except for Monk Kukai, whose eyes were covered by a patch of cherry blossoms, all the monks present watched the entire process. Although their feelings were not as profound and direct as Master Huanorai's, they still that feeling of great terror is still so clear. Forcibly, erase. This is a method and ending that would make ordinary people, no, even eminent monks tremble. Second round. Monk Kilu reminded. Here comes the poor monk. Monk Huiying came out. He was the direct ancestor of Qi Live at this moment. The string of Buddhist beads in Qi Lv's hand also contained a piece of his relic. It was natural for him to discuss Buddhism with Qi Live justified. Please enlighten me. Perhaps because he had just relived his childhood growth, Qi Lu's mood was also slightly depressed. Of course, this also made Qi Lu enter the state earlier. What has been lost, and you must seize what you can now as soon as possible. Monk Huiying clasped his hands together and said, today's cause will be the next day's result. If you sow the cause, you will get the cause, and if you sow the result, you will get the result. The cycle of cause and effect is the principle of Buddhism. The reverse flow of cause and effect leads to the Buddha becoming a demon. Discussing Buddhism, at their level, is no longer just about exploring and comparing one's understanding and familiarity with Buddhist scriptures, but has risen to a worldview and even a confrontation between beliefs and beliefs. If you are not careful, Xinjiang will collapse, which will be an irreversible situation for most people. Monk Huiying's words actually sneer at Qi Lv's behavior of deceiving his master and destroying his ancestors, which is contrary to human ethics and absurd. It implies that if Qi Lv cannot turn back and insist on going his own way, he will drift away from the Buddha and may even fall into the devil's path. Qi Lu stretched out his hand and pointed at the white jade rosette at his feet, then pointed at the bluestone table surrounded by monks and the compass on the bluestone table that exuded the aura of the formation, and said calmly. This is the cause, and the poor monk is the effect. You plant the cause and know that there will be results. The cycle of cause and effect is the ultimate principle of Buddha. He who sows the cause does not know what the effect is, and he who sows the cause should bear the effect. If you get good results and enjoy them, if you get bad results you despise them. What's so different from the stupid and careless village women in the world? Relics, color is not different from emptiness, emptiness is not different from color, color is emptiness, emptiness is color, and the same is true for feelings, thoughts, and awareness. Monk Huiguo heard the words and nodded slightly. Naturally, he could understand the monk's meaning, that is, today is the game you are playing, and I am the cause and effect of this game. I want to take away what I want, and you don't want it? Giving means not following cause and effect. You reap the fruits of what you sow, and you choose to accept or not accept them because they are beneficial or harmful to you. This is different from the dull people in the secular world outside who only like to see beautiful things but hate unpleasant things. What's the difference? But monk Huiying didn't know what his master's mentality was like. His own emotions did fluctuate slightly because of Kilu's counterattack. This traitor actually compared himself to a stupid village woman. Monk Huiying wanted to continue the debate, but then he smiled and thought of a better way. He took a step back, put his palm on the compass on the bluestone table, and said, "You said that we bore the fruit of you because we planted the cause of today. If I strike with the palm now, the cause of today will be gone, and the fruit of you will naturally be gone too. The line of cause and effect exists in one thought. Cause and effect is Buddha, and Buddha's law is immeasurable. Even if it is measured today, it is not cause and effect." What monk Huiying means is very simple. Didn't Kilo say that you were asked to come out because you and others were playing this game today? Doesn't your 7 laws say that we must follow your consequences after we sow the cause? If I break this compass now, then all the connections will be over. Where you come from, you will go back to where you came from. The cause of today will be gone. If the cause is gone, the effect will be gone. Cause and effect is the great principles of Buddhism, are the avenue that all sentient beings pursue. They are causes and effects that are infinite and boundless and can be destroyed. That is not the real cause and effect. Hearing the words, Kilo thought thoughtfully. In fact, as his direct master, he pushed the competition on Buddhism to an extreme. It was a bit like two people playing chess. Originally, at the level of Chiu-se, no one could win or lose. Sure, but one of them has the qualifications to overturn the chessboard at any time and make the game invalid, so the outcome of the game is actually meaningless. Monk Huiguo looked at the compass in front of him, and then at the disciple in front of him. He said nothing. Cause and effect is the way to go. There is no fairness or unfairness. Once the compass is destroyed, the past and future will be destroyed. Contact. After this, the monks are still monks, Qinglong Temple is still Qinglong Temple, Kilu is still Kilu, there is no intersection anymore. It just depends on whether this young boy can break this situation. When the other monks saw that monk Huiying had taken the initiative, they were extremely happy. They had lost the previous sitting meditation competition, so they couldn't lose twice in a row, right? You must know that they are all the ancestors of this boy. If they can't cure him, it will be really embarrassing. There were only 2 monks present with calm faces, neither happy nor sad. They had guessed what Master Huiguo was thinking. If they were not sure before, then Master had personally picked a cherry blossom petal to block Monk Kyukai's mind. The action in front of him is actually an explanation. But the 2 monks said nothing and did nothing. Since the master had something to worry about, there was no need for them to say anything. As for the rest of the eminent monks, to be honest, although there are some who are unwilling to part with their own cultivation and the inheritance and destiny of Qinglong Temple, most of them are actually quite open-minded and can be accepted by Master Huiguo as his disciple. How can the Dharma heir be an ordinary person? Even if Monk Kyukai, whose eyes are currently covered by a piece of cherry blossom petals, can start the Shinjin sect after returning to Japan, how can other eminent monks be inferior? It's not that they really didn't want to part with anything, they just felt that it was really unpleasant to be suddenly visited by a junior disciple asking for Dharma body cultivation. Yes, that's the unpleasant feeling. And now, senior brother Huiying is worthy of being the direct master of this traitor. Doesn't this mean he has a good grasp of this traitor? Monk Kilu remained silent for a long time, which in the eyes of the surrounding monks was a sign of being at a loss for words and a sign of a dilemma. Sure enough, Qi Lu spoke. Yes. All the eminent monks were a little surprised now. What does Ran mean? Just admit defeat so openly. The guy who had previously arrogantly said that he wanted to cultivate his Dharma body to deceive his master and destroy his ancestors, actually gave up defeat so neatly? Even monk Hui Ying was a little surprised. In fact, he still admired Chi Lv in his heart. Even though he had some behavior of deceiving his master and destroying his ancestors, after all, he was the one with the highest cultivation level among the later generations of disciples, and he came from his own lineage. But soon, a smile appeared at the corner of Kilu's mouth. He stretched out his palm and pointed at the compass on the bluestone table, and said, "Master, you can give it a try." "Do you think the poor monk dare not?" monk Huiying asked. "Amitabha, no, it's not that I don't dare, it's that I can't." Monk Kilu took a deep breath, looked at monk Huiying calmly, and said sincerely, "Master, and all the masters and uncles have always believed that the disciples deceived the master and destroyed the ancestors. Elders, didn't you know that this disciple has said so many words and stood here for so long? This is already the greatest respect and sincerity." "Ha, arrogant, so arrogant. Is this, not admitting defeat?" The surrounding eminent monks were amused by Kilu. In fact, it was difficult for them to have real emotions of fear and hatred. Things in this world were generally done according to preferences, and following their own will was their current nature. Of course, the scene during the previous meditation, it indeed gave them great fear. This was an exception and could not be measured by common sense. Monk Huiguo tapped his fingertips lightly on the bluestone table, feeling something in his heart. Monk Hui Ying did not have the ability to see into everything like his master, but he asked with some confusion, "It's really, unbelievable." Yes, it was hard for them to understand what Kilu just said. They couldn't let eminent monks like them point at Kilu and scold him, "Why is your mother XXX so thick-skinned?" Monk Kilu clasped his hands together, saluted all the masters and uncles present in turn, and finally saluted his direct master, monk Huiying, and then said, "Today's cause is you, so of course the humble monk is today's effect. But in fact, the cause of today is not you. The cause of today is the poor monk himself, and you are the result of the past. Cause and effect are orderly, Dharma is immeasurable. Since the poor monk is the cause, you must be the effect. When the effect occurs depends on the cause. The Dharma body and cultivation of the masters, and when the Qinglong temple's luck is obtained, also depend on the poor monk. The 7 laws of the poor monk are caused by this." Monk Kilu suddenly raised his voice and said, "Because it is established on the body of a poor monk, and the poor monk comes from 1,000 years later, and after 1,000 years, the masters have already passed away. So, there are no masters today, and there is no real Qinglong temple today. This is a bit like Einstein's theory of relativity. The so-called cause is like a coordinate. If the coordinates were established in the Tang dynasty thousands of years ago, then these eminent monks would be able to determine the effect of the monk. If the monk Hui Ying destroys without the compass, Kilu will lose all contact with this party thousands of years ago. But if the coordinates are set on the 7 laws, and the 7 laws are the causes, then looking at the 7 laws as the coordinates, it is already the 21st century, 1,000 years later. Where is the real Qinglong temple? Where else do these masters exist?" The meaning of Kilu is very simple. "In my eyes, you are all dead. I have stood here talking nonsense to you dead people for so long. Isn't that polite and respectful enough?" In an instant, when Chi Lv made his great wish, the bodies of all the monks present began to decline. Monk Huiying stretched out his hand to break the compass into pieces, but his palm turned into withered bones and then into fly ash. All the monks and eminent monks here wanted to say or do something, but they found that they could not move at all. Their bodies, their cultivation, and everything about them were disappearing, decaying, and going away. The eminent monks who were originally on the white jade lotus seats turned into withered bones at this time. Chi Lu stood there, his eyes still calm, his hands clasped together again, and he said again, "Amitabha. This sound. It's to say goodbye." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyaolong. Chapter 969. On the white jade lotus seat, a group of virtuous and eminent monks turned into bones one after another. Even the Qinglong temple also showed a dilapidated look at this time, and the colorful scene of fallen flowers also turned into the desolation of late autumn. However, at this moment, the surroundings suddenly became still. This was different from the stillness of the picture, but more like a reshaping of time. Of course, this is not the real world, and Kilu did not travel through time and space. The connection between everyone, and more, it's like an illusory bond. Monk Kilu didn't seem to be surprised at all by this. He just looked at the withered skeleton sitting at the head of the bluestone table calmly. The skin and flesh of the withered bones began to reshape, along with the withered bones that had a piece of cherry blossom on their foreheads. The former is the monk Huiguo, and the latter is the monk Kukai. Monk Kukai was still sitting there motionless, as if he was still unaware of everything around him, but monk Huiguo slowly stood up and walked towards Kilu after his body's skin and flesh recovered. "You are still a little too impatient," monk Huiguo said. At the same time, monk Huiguo opened his palms and held a handful of cherry blossoms in his palms. A gust of autumn wind blew by and the cherry blossoms drifted away. Only 2 or 3 cherry blossoms remained in the handful. Without respect for Buddha and ancestors, I didn't expect that I would become like this. Master Huiguo stood in front of Kilu and looked at Kilu very seriously. He seemed to be looking in the mirror, but he always felt that the image of himself in the mirror was a bit strange. "You are you, and I am me." Chilu raised his hand, and the light of the Buddhist beads in his hand was faintly visible at this time. "I am just curious, how long are you going to sit there and watch the show?" Alas, monk Huiguo sighed, reached out and patted his chest gently, then turned sideways and looked at the motionless skeletons of eminent monks on the white jade lotus seat. "They are me after all. As a disciple, this Qinglong temple is my hard work after all." Amitabha. Chilu took a step back. This step showed an attitude, somewhat similar to the Chu River and Han dynasties. Monk Huiguo smiled slightly. In fact, he knew the attitude of the person in front of him from the beginning. Otherwise, he could have made a better choice and a less wasteful choice. From your standpoint, compared to you, we are just a phantom memory left here. How much can you take away from the phantom memory? If you stand from our standpoint, they are living people. Monk Huiguo asked seriously, "Do you feel that it is too regrettable?" "At least, I'm still me," Chilu replied. "I'm not trying to survive, nor am I trying to last longer. I'm not that vulgar, and I'm not that boring. I also yearn for a free place where I'll be forgotten for the rest of my life. But I still think it might be better for me to replace you. After all, my wisdom, my ideas, my experience, everything about me seems to be better than yours. I don't need to force you, and I don't need to use force. I just want to ask you one last time, are you really unwilling?" Chilu didn't hesitate at all and shook his head directly. "That's all." Monk Huiguo took a few steps back and sat back on the bluestone table. He frowned slightly, as if thinking, looking at it, or with a self-deprecating look. "I don't know what kind of emotions I'm thinking about. Perhaps, this expression and this state of mind should not appear on this legendary monk, but now, it is a very special moment." "Can you tell me why you are so wary of me?" Monk Huiguo asked. "If you follow my method, you will still be you, and I will still be me. You can even become a better you, and I can also become a better person, become a better me. If you were sealed here for more than 1,000 years, maybe the poor monk would be tempted, but you are not. For you, even if you are already 60 years old this year, it may be the twilight years of your life for ordinary people at that time, but for you, you are in your prime. It is precisely because you are too excellent and too lonely that the poor monk dare not agree with your approach. The poor monk has a friend who has a similar experience. The poor monk is not him. At this time, he does not have the confidence to walk the same path he has walked." Chi Lu said. "Actually, there is another reason that you didn't say. The smile and calmness on Monk Huiguo's face completely disappeared at this time, replaced by a slightly joking expression, as if only at this moment, he could remove the all masks of oneself. It is also appropriate to use your true self to see your true self. You know, I won't be willing to waste it like this. Qi Lu didn't say anything when he heard this, but this attitude was already acquiescence. If you don't waste it, don't waste it. Monk Huiguo clasped his hands together and said, Amitabha, you are sorry for all my disciples. Next moment, everything around them began to recover. The monks who had turned into withered bones began to regain their flesh and blood, and the bleak environment once again changed back to the atmosphere of brilliant cherry blossoms. The monks seemed to have just taken a nap, and all had regained consciousness at this time, except for monk Kukai, who was still sitting there motionless. Before the monks could say anything or take other actions, only to hear Monk Huiguo shout, "Receive the luck of Qinglong Temple." In an instant, a green shadow began to rise and gather from above the Qinglong Temple, turning into the shadow of a blue dragon. Go! As Monk Huiguo pointed his finger, the shadow of the green dragon floated directly to Qilu. Qilu reached out his hand and grabbed it without any politeness. Then, Qilu's eyes began to look back and forth in front of the masters in front of him. The meaning is very simple. Give it to him. Give him the Dharmakaya cultivation. Monk Huiguo said. Follow the law. The monks did not hesitate at all, nor did they show any resistance or dissatisfaction. In this era, the identity of the master was enough for them to do whatever they were told to do without any meaning. The next moment, phantoms of Buddha's light floated up from the monks' bodies, and slowly they all converged on Qi Lv. Only the monk Kukai remained motionless. One leaf can't see Mount Tai refers to his state at this time. He had no idea what was happening outside and was completely isolated. A Buddha body that almost turned into substance also appeared on Monk Huiguo, and he slowly walked towards Qilu, and finally sat cross-legged next to Qilu. On my side, it's over. On your side, it's time to start. Monk Huiguo waved his palm, and everything around him seemed to be cut apart at this moment, like a scroll being cut from the middle. On one side were the monks on the white jade lotus seat, and on the other side was Qilu alone. The wind gently blew through Qinglong Temple, which was built in the first year of Yongzhen reign of Emperor Shunzong of the Tang dynasty. The pace of spring brought the colorful cherry blossoms, creating a peaceful scene. On the white jade lotus seat, the 60-year-old Master Huiguo raised his teacup and said Amitabha. In an instant, the monks below woke up leisurely, as if they and others had just taken a nap together, and as if they were only slightly absent-minded. Let's end today's tea party, Master Huiguo said. Follow the law. All the monks said yes together and slowly left. Only Kukai, a Japanese monk who came with the envoy sent to the Tang dynasty last year, was left. He had already become a disciple of Master Huiguo of Qinglong Temple and received his true teachings. Kukai, what else do you want? Master Huiguo's face was already full of wrinkles and ravines. In this era, 40 years old is already considered old, and 60 years old is already a real longevity. Kukai was a little surprised, because he had just seen that brother Kanari, who had been practicing silent meditation for 30 years, actually opened his mouth to say goodbye to his master with all the brothers. Senior brother Hui's actually spoke. Immediately, upon hearing the master's inquiry, Monk Kukai looked at the master with some surprise, only to find that the master's originally gentle and jade-like face was now full of grooves, and the palms protruding from the cassock were also skinny and bony. Master, why have you become so old? Monk Kukai remembered that when he came to the Tang dynasty with the envoy sent to the Tang dynasty to meet his master for the first time, although the master was in his 60s, he looked like a man of 20 years old. After a year, master actually. The heart is troubled because it is uneasy. If you can't see through the illusion, how can you see through the world of mortals? Monk Huiguo looked at Kukai and said. Monk Kukai felt a chill in his heart and quickly clasped his hands together and said. What the master said is true, I am convinced. Kukai, you are a disciple of the two schools of Buddhism. Although you have been studying for 1 year, you can already leave the section as a teacher, you can deduce cause and effect. The future roots of my tantric Buddhism depend on you. You can pack it up and go back. Is the master trying to drive me away? Kukai was a little panicked. In this era, the gap between the Tang dynasty and Japan was equivalent to the United States and Mexico in later generations. Whether it was in terms of national identity or Buddhist attainments, Monk Kukai was sincerely convinced of Qinglong Temple, so how could he be willing to leave at this time? Raising his hand to stop Monk Kukai from speaking, Monk Huiguo continued, since the reign of Emperor Taizong, the prosperity of our Buddhism has exceeded 3 decades. You must know that when water is full, it will overflow. Nowadays, there are vast temples in the world, countless temple properties, and temple slaves. It is even more uncountable that in less than 40 years, a catastrophe will inevitably come to Buddhism. Qinglong Temple, which is the leader of Buddhism in the Tang dynasty, will definitely bear the brunt of this disaster. However, the tantric inheritance cannot be broken. After saying that, Monk Huiguo looked at Kukai with a smile. When Kukai heard this, he took a deep breath, clasped his hands together and said, Amitabha, I respectfully follow my master's teachings. Go. 3 days later, Monk Kukai left Qinglong Temple and embarked on the road back to Japan. He did not bring a book of scriptures or any money. In addition to a cassock, he only took away a piece of cherry blossom from Qinglong Temple. In the same year, Monk Huiguo passed away in Qinglong Temple. 40 years later, during the Yongchang period of Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty, Emperor Wuzong destroyed Buddhism and destroyed more than 46,000 temples in the world, forced nearly 300,000 monks and nuns to return to secular life, and accepted 150,000 slaves. Qinglong Temple was burned to the ground in this catastrophe. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyaolong. Chapter 970. Buddhist culture, Taoist culture, and Confucian culture have always had a profound impact on the entire Chinese culture. However, just like the development of Confucianism, it constantly changes and modifies itself with the changes of dynasties and the needs of those in power to obtain with greater development and longer-term continuation. Perhaps the great Confucian scholars from the pre-Qin period would be directly pissed off when they came to the reign of Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty. Human beings are a race that are very good at adapting to local conditions. Adapting to local conditions here not only refers to practical conditions such as climate and mountains and rivers, but also includes things on the spiritual level. For example, Monk Kilu at this time, he originally thought that he had understood this point, but at this time, he found that he had underestimated the ancients. Of course, this ancients actually had a great relationship with him. The Buddha's shadow transformed from the Dharmakaya cultivation of more than a dozen great virtuous monks kept circling around Kilu, chanting sutras and worshipping the Buddha, laughing and cursing, playing with the world, or frowning. Dharmakaya not only refers to cultivation, but also it means a state of true self, which is somewhat similar to the inner true self, so what it presents is more similar to the world. Only an almost completely materialized Buddha body sat cross-legged and looked at the Chi LV so calmly. The Chi LV could sense it. The rest of the Dharma body had become unconscious and became extremely pure. But this golden Buddha still carried his self consciousness and thinking. Why don't you start quickly? The golden Buddha is naturally the Dharmakaya of Monk Huiguo, and at this time he began to urge. Qi Lu did not rush to take action, but waited until the noise around him gradually dissipated, and slowly, as if he had returned to the human world again. Qinglong Temple is still Qinglong Temple, with an endless stream of tourists coming and going. Nowadays, Qinglong Temple is actually more like a huge park. Monk Killa clasped his hands together and recited the Heart Sutra, and the Buddhas floated away. It was like forming a barrier here and forming an independent area of its own in this public area. The Dharmakaya, which was originally vivid and varied in postures, began to become quiet after following Chi Lv back to the real world. It could even be said to be a little sluggish. Even the golden light on the golden Buddha dimmed. So cautious, the golden Buddha said with a smile. Of course he knew what Killed meant by doing this, but then he looked up at the sky again and asked in surprise, after 1,000 years, is it already so clear? When Killa heard the words, he thought deeply. In fact, there has always been a question in the audience circle, that is, how many generations of listeners are there? Just because of the erasure mechanism of broadcasting and the frequency of audience replacement, it is difficult to find a real answer to this question. After all, there is no Sima Qian in the audience. But we can also compare it in a disguised way. For example, when broadcasting attacked this world plane, it took about 150 years. Of course, this must exclude the fact that Alexander the Great taught broadcasting to play with his own fall, resulting in the Macedonian Empire, which still had some strength at the time, collapsed directly because of this. The corpses of the Qin soldiers that Subai and Fatih saw in the Tibetan caves were the princesses of Qin who led the troops to deal with the remnants of the Macedonian Empire who were enslaved by radio and died in battle. Furthermore, the first emperor used tens of thousands of tigers to kill each other to create 500 evil stars, hiding a large part of his power. Therefore, if they really try their best to resist, both the Macedonian Empire and the Qin dynasty will be able to resist for a longer period of time. It is possible that this 150 years will become 200 years or even 250 years. This may be the approximate time it takes for radio to conquer the next story world, which may be around 200 years. Therefore, during this period, there are almost more than 30 generations of listeners, which means that the train left for almost 3 years. 10 times. The Qin dynasty was almost 200 BC, excluding the time when broadcasting was actually attacking the next world, which means that for 2,000 years, the frequency of broadcasting activities was actually not frequent. During this period, the broadcasters who moved here may be accumulating energy, or they may be transforming the civilization attributes of this real world, or they may be designing and manufacturing story worlds that will be used in the future. In short, they are doing various preparation activities. If you calculate it like this, everything actually makes sense. When will the broadcaster feel that he is ready? One of the landmark time points is almost the first industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution was probably in the 1860s. The development of human productivity began to change with each passing day. The dimensional attributes of scientific and technological civilization were officially achieved, which is equivalent to radio's project to change the world was complete. Then it began to target the next world that needed to be transformed. The large-scale systematic and industrialized listener manufacturing assembly line also started at that time. By now, that world has basically been successfully attacked, and the broadcast is ready to move. In terms of time, it is almost the same. Can also go up against it? Of course, there were no audiences in ancient times. Not entirely true, but at that time large-scale attacks and mass production probably had not yet begun, so the number of listeners was not large. Maybe the radio broadcasters would also do some experiments and tests to get some listeners for later data use in mass production. But the clearest manifestation of that era is that the world has become increasingly unfriendly to those who practice it. Things similar to the Qin dynasty when the first emperor could easily summon an army of 100,000 high-level listeners are almost impossible to happen again. This is somewhat similar to the elaboration of views such as the apocalyptic age or the Earth supernatural thin theory. The mythical beasts represented by the dragon clan began to disappear, and it became difficult for humans to practice. In the end, the advancement of science and technology was accompanied by the decline of even the last ancient martial arts into an extremely embarrassing situation. For example, due to the development of industry and technology, archers who required a lot of time and energy to train were replaced by musketeers. Human beings began to increasingly ignore the exploration of their own potential and instead embarked on the path of believing in foreign objects, the so-called technology. Go up. In the Tang dynasty more than 1,000 years ago, monk Huiguo's astonishing and brilliant existence was definitely rare. Moreover, at that time, because the broadcast activities were not as clear and obvious as in later generations, monk Huiguo only felt as if he was above his head. There was a vague eye watching the time. As for the other ones, he could no longer sense anything. However, when his Dharmakaya cultivation followed the Kilu and completely returned to the present moment, monk Huiguo clearly felt it for the first time. The terror and pressure from that existence. Perhaps this was the reason why he really gave up replacing Qi Leave. It wasn't that he had much affection for himself, the reincarnated monk. The figures of more than a dozen virtuous and eminent monks began to enter Kilu's body one after another. Fusion and advancement. At this time, it completely kicked off. The most important thing for advanced listeners to advance is to lay a foundation. Senior listeners rely on the fusion of natal magic weapons to expand their energy carriers, while advanced listeners further develop thoroughly. Gradually, with the integration of the eminent monk's Dharmakaya, the foundation of the 7 laws was slowly shaped at this time, and its bones also turned into gold at this time, with a simple and heavy atmosphere. 10%, 2%, 30%, 80%, 90%. It stands to reason that he only needs to take one more step to successfully advance to Kilu. However, in fact, he himself has already had the ability to advance directly before. His current advancement is simply based on the cultivation of the Dharmakaya of these eminent monks. Just piled up. Next moment, Qi Lu let out a low growl from his throat. The progress that had originally reached 90% dropped to 10% in an instant. This was a kind of compression, an extremely luxurious compression. Then, Kilu began to inject his own power into it. 10%, 2%, 30%, 4%, 5%, until 70%. Qi Lu looked at the golden Buddha sitting on one side, which meant that it was time for you to integrate. The golden Buddha Shi Shiren stood up and directly overlapped Kilv's body. In an instant. It has been directly promoted to 90%, and the power is surging. Once the advancement is completed, it is likely to directly break through the advanced listener level and reach the advanced listener intermediate level. However, at this moment, a voice sounded from the bottom of Kilv's heart. It's not enough, compress it again. Qi LV is a little confused, compress it again? But I no longer have any trump cards. Compressing it again, if you don't succeed in advancing in the end, you will probably become like Chen Ryu, but become the strongest in the realm of seniors. You can even beat ordinary senior listeners, but it is difficult. Advance further because your size is too big. Although he still has a piece of Qinglong Temple's luck and a string of Buddhist beads in his hand, it is difficult to support the accumulation of advanced power after compressing it again. Therefore, Qi LV originally planned to save Qinglong Temple's luck and Buddhist beads for future use. If I tell you to compress it again, will I lie to myself? Please hurry up, I have to go to Western Paradise to find my group of disciples. After all, it is me, the master, who has failed them. While Qi Lu was still confused, he suddenly felt a majestic power of luck falling from the void and directly blessing him. This luck was so powerful that even Qi Lu could not imagine it. This. What's this? Anyway, I have also been the imperial master of the Tang dynasty for the 3rd generation. It is not difficult to borrow some luck and steal Ziwei's true energy. His Li family is nothing more than a Guozhou who has been missing for more than 100 years. Hearing this, Qi Lu suddenly didn't know what attitude to use to face his previous life, and even felt like something was broken in his heart. But faced with such a great opportunity, Kilo chose to compress again without hesitation. At the same time, he was also looking forward to how high his realm would be after 3 compressions and further advancements. Perhaps, among so many generations of advanced listeners in the entire audience circle, advanced in such an extreme way, Kilo is definitely the first. In the first year of Yongzhen reign of Emperor Shunzong of the Tang dynasty, the monk Huiguo passed away. After the death of the monk Huiguo, both Tang Dizong and the prince, later Shunzong, were critically ill. Dizong died and was passed down to the prince, Shunzong. Shunzong also died after half a year of reigning. The Yongzhen reign name is only the first year. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 971. Meow. Meow. Meow meow. Meow meow meow. Meow 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 meow. Meow 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 meow. Sir, what can I do for you? A Donghai Airlines flight attendant saw a passenger raising her hand and immediately came over and asked, "Are you carrying a lot of small animals on this flight?" "Like cats," the male passenger asked. "Sorry, we don't accept this kind of checked baggage on this flight," the stewardess explained with a smile. The male passenger smiled doubtfully and signaled that he was fine. After the stewardess left, he said to himself, "This is strange, I just heard a cat meowing." The male passenger turned his head and looked at the passengers sitting 2 seats to his right. These 2 people were quite strange. Although summer had passed, the weather was not so hot yet. The 2 of them had been sitting there since they got on the plane. "Wearing a jacket, I haven't taken it off yet." Shaking his head, the male passenger turned sideways and continued to catch up on his sleep. When the vibration of the plane landing woke up the male passenger, he stretched first, turned on his mobile phone and checked the time while the plane was taxiing. It was already 3 o'clock in the morning, and his company was really too busy. "Damn it, every time I go on a business trip, I always arrange red-eye discounted flights." But at this moment, the male passenger suddenly froze. "Huh? Why are the 2 guys in leather jackets next to me missing? Went to the toilet?" The male passenger turned his head. He was sitting in the second to last row at the end, and the toilet was very close to him. However, the cabin toilet was basically closed before the plane landed, so it was impossible for the 2 of them to stay in the toilet. "Damn, you must be dreaming," the male passenger muttered to himself, and then he rubbed his chin and stopped thinking about it. "Hey, wake up, wake up." A man wearing blue long sleeves was woken up by 2 police officers. He wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth and looked around in confusion. He found that he was lying on the roadside outside the airport terminal. He reached out and touched his pocket. He still found his mobile phone and wallet, and then he breathed a sigh of relief. "Show me your ID," a police officer said. "Oh, okay, comrade police, I don't know why I slept here. Maybe I'm too tired." "What do you do?" "I'm a taxi driver." Suddenly, the man seemed to have thought of something and immediately jumped up and looked around, then shouted, "Where's my car, where's my car?" He obviously drove here and waited to be picked up at the airport. At this moment, on the Chengdu Ring Expressway, a taxi was traveling at an extremely exaggerated speed, changing lanes quickly without turning on the turn signal, startling the drivers in nearby cars. The owner of a van shook out his cigarette ashes, then glanced out the window on his side, and his whole body immediately trembled. "Grass. What did I see? What the hell is driving? A cat?" Through the window, the van owner saw that the person sitting next to him in the driving seat of the taxi was not his brother's sister, but a black cat standing on tiptoes. The black cat seemed to feel his gaze and turned his head to look at him. The owner of the van was so frightened that he trembled and quickly turned on the right turn signal and pulled over. When the car stopped, he slapped himself twice. "I told you to drive when you were tired. I told you to drive when you were tired. Damn it, you are hallucinating from fatigue." The taxi moved very quickly. It drove directly out of Chengdu City from Shuangliu Airport and immediately drove onto the provincial highway in the direction of Sichuan. In the car, a black cat held the steering wheel empty while its tail was wrapped around the gears and kept changing gears. There was also a black cat underneath who was responsible for pressing the brake, accelerator, and clutch. Yes. It was these two cats who cooperated so skillfully that the taxi felt like it was in a deserted land. They started racing in the city and had a great time on the provincial highway. They overtook other cars on even the steepest curves. On the contrary, it startled the normal driving vehicles on the opposite side. Finally, the furious taxi stopped 200 kilometers from Chengdu. Meow. The black cat controlling the steering wheel meowed at the black cat below. Meow. The black cat below responded. The black cat above glanced at the fuel gauge, then opened the car door and jumped out of the car. On the side of the road, two black cats abandoned the car that ran out of gas and just sat there. You looked at me, I looked at you, and then the two cats jumped up the mountain together and quickly disappeared into the mountains. The small temple has been built. Because the scale is not large, it is full of budget. There are only 3 small temples and a small row of wing rooms, which are similar to the courtyard houses in Beijing. For the more popular temples nowadays, they are really shabby. No matter how shabby it is, the fat man feels very satisfied. His Sanking patriarch is facing the Tathagata Buddha from the monk's side. I wonder if there will be a fight? Early this morning, the fat man sat down on a wicker chair alone with a pot of tea. The wicker chair was placed at the entrance of the small temple, which faced the orphanage on the opposite hill. If you leave aside the orphanage that exudes a black atmosphere, the sense of vision standing here in the small temple will really be better. But it is a pity that the reason why the small temple chose to build it here is because it is close to the orphanage and is convenient for watching the kids for nothing. The fat man took a sip of tea and smashed it into his mouth. He speculated in his mind that Buddha should be back soon. If the monk succeeded in advancing, he should be back in the next 2 days. As for Dabai, well, God knows what he got in Longhu Mountain. Stay how long? The fat man had just enjoyed a short moment of leisure when he was disturbed by a sound of hitting. He frowned. He could guess without thinking that the woman named Suner was practicing alone there. That woman was working very hard. Anyway, the slightly larger rocks on the nearby hills were smashed into pieces by her as a training object. Since it was Subai who asked her to come here, Fatty was embarrassed to say anything to others, although he still preferred the quietness of being alone. Of course, it was impossible for Fatty to go and give advice to others. Although Fatty's current state was more than enough to give advice to Sunur, there was no hope that this woman would succeed in attaining enlightenment anyway, so he was too lazy to waste his free time. If Subai is willing, let Subai teach her. The fat man twisted his neck, moved to a more comfortable position, put on a noise-cancelling headset next to him, and hummed while continuing to enjoy the morning breeze, continuing to find his own comfort. As he listened, Fatty suddenly frowned, switched to the next song, and then frowned again. Then Fatty immediately took out his phone and took a look, and found that for no reason, all the music stored in his hand had turned into the same color. Chrysanthemum Terrace. Damn it, Fatty is the most sensitive to this song, especially when he hears chrysanthemums all over the ground. He always feels a faint pain in his lower body. The fat man stood up. He was with the woman named Suner nearby. That woman would definitely not be so bored that she would secretly change her phone to make this joke, and she couldn't get close to him. Chen, you could do it? Yes, but I haven't seen this woman for a long time, and even if she could do it, She couldn't be so boring as to tease him. As for Subai and the others, it was impossible for them to just make a joke on themselves and avoid showing up when they came back. Could it be that the phone is poisoned? Fatty muttered to himself and manually deleted all the songs on his phone. Feeling a little upset, he stood up and stretched heavily. Boom. Boom. Huh? What sound? The fat man made a distinction and realized that this could not be the sound made by the woman named Sunar while practicing, unless that woman had now advanced from an ordinary listener to an advanced listener. Soon, Fatty discovered that the source of the sound and energy fluctuations was actually the orphanage on the opposite hill. Someone. The formation that bombarded the orphanage. My dear grandfather. The fat man was so frightened that he immediately used his flying sword and flew over. The formation must not be destroyed, otherwise the little ones inside would also be annihilated. Only after Dabai becomes a big boss can he destroy the formation. Also get the little guy out. If when Dabai comes back and finds that the orphanage has collapsed and his son is gone, God, Fatty won't even dare to think about how he will face that mental illness. When the fat man reached the top of the mountain opposite, he was stunned for a moment. When did these two cats come from Shanghai? But Fatty had no time to think about anything else, because Ji Xiang had raised his cat's paw again and was about to blast the door of the orphanage. My cat master, don't fight. This formation is extraordinary. If the formation is broken, the little guy inside will die. Fatty did not attack Jixiang directly because he knew that Jixiang could understand his words. At the same time, Fatty also knew that Jixiang cared more about the little guy's safety than he did. Sure enough, when the fat man shouted this, Ji Xiang was stunned for a moment. His originally reddish eyes showed a clear color at this time, but they looked very dim. Then he crawled down at the gate of the orphanage. Ruyi on one side had a convenience bag in his mouth. Seeing that Jixiang was motionless, he crawled down beside him. The fat man then came closer, pointed to the temple on the hilltop opposite and said, "Why don't you go and sit at my house? You can see here from there." Jixiang didn't say a word and continued to crawl, and Ruyi didn't like the fat man. The fat man also sat down next to him. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he reminded. The world has changed recently. Don't run around. Be careful of being discovered by other high-level listeners. Since you have arrived here from Shanghai, don't go out and wander around without saying hello. You know what? Hey, what is in this little plastic bag? The fat man reached out and took the plastic bag from Ruyi. When he opened it, he found that there were many bags of fresh milk with some residual coldness. He must have stolen, it from a nearby county and rushed here quickly. Seeing the contents of the bag, the fat man placed the plastic bag in front of Ji Xiang again. Shook his head. Sighing heavily. Do evil. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 972. Speed up, hurry up, hurry up. A man wearing a baseball cap urged his subordinates in the carriage. What was inside the medium truck was not cargo, but computers and servers. The reason why he was working on a moving truck was to increase the police's awareness of him. Difficulty of reverse tracing. Boss, let's go in. A subordinate raised his hand to indicate. Modify the power distribution program. Baseball hat issued a new order. At the same time, he sat down in front of a computer and started tapping the keyboard with his hands quickly. After the regional voltage tilts, we will wait for the most gorgeous fireworks. Bar. The mouth of the baseball cap opened and made a bang mouth shape. The rest of the people also laughed at this time. However, at this moment, the truck suddenly came to a sudden stop, and everyone in the carriage stumbled unprepared. Before they could stand up again, the door of the truck compartment was opened, and a group of policemen pointed their guns at them. Police, don't move. Whoever is still standing here stupidly at this time is really crazy. Generally, it is difficult to collect real evidence for this kind of internet information crime. For example, the most common illegal online gambling is often divided into several. Some of them are located in different countries. To attack them, police from several countries must plan and close the network at the same time. At that moment, Baseball Hat and his men ignored the police's gunfire and began to clear away traces of computer use. The police immediately rushed up and kicked these people to isolate them. When Baseball Hat was pressed against the wall of the car with his backhand, there was a look of horror on his face, because when he started the self-destruct program just now, his computer didn't respond at all. This is impossible, impossible. The arrest was successful. Ha ha ha. Oh yeah. Everyone in the Cybercrime Division office of the police station cheered and celebrated. Hey, how did you locate it? A policeman walked up to the hero who successfully determined the coordinates of the opponent in this operation and asked, which can be regarded as a kind of learning. The other party looked at his colleague helplessly. Can I say that I didn't know it myself? When I first found out, I even suspected that my computer had been hacked. Hey, just be funny. Okay, the team leader said that you have made great contributions this time and want to treat us to dinner. You are the great hero, so you can choose the place. Whatever. After saying that, the hero was still staring blankly at his computer screen. He was very sure that during the search process, his mind was confused by the constantly changing IP address of the other party, but the screen inexplicably changed. He started to analyze the data on his own. Although the time was very short, maybe only 2 or 3 seconds, he was still able to capture it. This feeling. It was as if another invisible being took control of his computer at that moment and started calculating. This time. It's really not my own fault. Walking out of the high-speed rail station, facing the blazing sunshine outside, Subai felt like he was in a trance. The train ride from Jiangxi to Chengdu took almost 10 hours. Subai slept in the car, but when he woke up, after the car, I found that my head was still a little dizzy. Too much information, too many surprises, and too many emotional changes will always make people feel a little unprepared, especially when the recorded book is displayed in front of them. The impact is indeed huge. However, there were no living people in that village, not even the dead people, paper figures. Before leaving, Subai felt that the ending of the village was indeed a bit bleak. Lu He was not dead. Subai didn't know this. Unfortunately, he completely collapsed before his old classmates and roommates could meet again and chat for a few words. Lu Shen used his descendants as a carrier of messages. This approach is indeed extreme. Of course, Subai has seen this kind of thing before, and he is actually an example. In fact, there is no essential difference between Su Yuhang and Lu Sheng. After leaving the station, Subai planned to rely on his own strength to quickly return to the orphanage, but he did not expect that someone was waiting for him. Chen Guang was still the same as before. He was wearing a middle school uniform and looked very ordinary. However, he was probably afraid that Subai would miss him, so he deliberately let out a trace of his aura. This made him look like a big light bulb in the dark night to Subai. It's hard not to find out. Do you have a driver's license? Subai asked directly after getting into Chen Guang's car and sitting down in the passenger seat. Chen Guang shook his head and said straight to the point, "Do me a favor." "You're welcome." "Do you know about Zhang Xianzong's treasure?" Chen Guang asked. "Are you also interested in this?" Subai said in surprise, "Short of money?" "I remember that Sichuan province carried out excavation work on this in the first half of the year." Zhang Xianzhong was a native of Yan'an, Shaanxi. He was the leader of the peasant uprising in the late Ming dynasty. He once conquered Chengdu and proclaimed himself emperor in Chengdu. His founding name was Daxi and the name was changed to Dashun. Later, the Manchus entered the pass and died in front of a stalemate with the Qing army. It is said that he was killed by the Qing army's arrows because he was careless. Zhang Xianzhong also did a lot of burning, killing and looting in Sichuan. I don't know how much gold and silver wealth he looted. However, the gold and silver wealth that he originally wanted to transfer was because the Qing army arrived too quickly, so Zhang Xianzhong had to resort to the Jiangkao sinking silver method. Measures were taken to bury the treasure at the bottom of the river. The specific location has now been determined, in what is now Pengshan district, Maishan city. Haha, let's decide first whether you agree to do this favor for me, Chen Guang asked while driving. I don't seem to be that familiar with you, Subai said bluntly. It is true that he and Chen Guang are not that familiar. The only point of recognition may be Lichi, but Lichi let Hai Mai Mei steal the little guy from him. This matter may also be of benefit to you. I recently visited several ancient tombs in Zishu and found some interesting clues. You know, the radio has recently turned up the appeal of us listeners to those heretics. So things that were hard to detect before will now actively find you as soon as you walk around. But what does this have to do with Zhang Xianzhong? Subai asked. I found Duling's tomb, but one of the most critical things is missing from it. Who is Duling? Subai was really confused. Wangdi, you should know, right? Chen Guang asked. Wangdi in Li Shangyi's sentence, Wangdi's spring heart rests on the cuckoo. Subai frowned slightly, and then asked, the ancient Chu country. Yes, the ancient Chu kingdom. Chen Guang nodded and said, according to legend, Emperor Wang's original name was Du Yu, and he appointed Turtle Ling, a man in Jingzhou who was said to have been resurrected from the dead, as prime minister. Floods were flooding at that time, and the Shu kingdom was surrounded by mountains and a basin in the middle. The water could not flow out, so the turtle spirit dug through Wushan and guided the water out, forming today's Yangtze River. A few years later, Emperor Wang was passed down to him because of his great achievements. He practiced Taoism himself and turned into a cuckoo after his death. But I found that Emperor Wang, in fact, it didn't turn into a cuckoo bird, but into a stone man. Stone man? I have heard that the stone man stirred up rebellion in the Yellow River with one eye, but that was from the end of the Yuan dynasty. That stone man was just created by Han Shantong for the uprising against the Yuan dynasty, not the stone man. Historical records record that Zhang Xianzhong massacred Sichuan. Although there must be elements of the Qing court's conspiracy to plot against him, Zhang Xianzhong massacred people after he took control of Chengdu. It is indeed an indisputable fact. I suspect that when Zhang Xianzhong excavated the tomb and took away the stone man, he planned to use human blood to awaken the stone man to help him fight for the world, but he probably failed, or he died before he could react in time. I don't believe it, Subai said directly. Besides, I'm not very interested in your stone man. But I need a helper. I can now roughly determine the location of the stone man, which is in Maishan city, but I need the help of another senior listener. The stone man may have the ability to hide himself. Even now. I've been there and sensed it, but it didn't come up to me like other things. I was worried about alerting the enemy, so I didn't take action at that time. Send me back to the orphanage first, and then ask Fatty if he has time. Subai could be regarded as a disguised rejection. Hearing this, Chen Guang was stunned and said with some surprise, are we going to break through again? I've been stuck in the intermediate level of advanced audience for a while. How long has it been? Chen Guang shook his head helplessly, trying not to think about such shocking things. Okay, I'll take you to that orphanage, and you can show me the way. Perhaps, Chen Guang just wanted to find another high-level listener who was trustworthy and could at least abide by the spoils-sharing contract to capture the stone man together. Therefore, the reason why he came to pick up Subai was probably to invite Subai. A fat man or a monk can also think about it. More than an hour later, Chen Guang drove the car into the mountains. There was no road here, but after the bulldozers compacted it, a relatively flat area was formed. At the same time, Subai also saw the hill on the opposite side of the hill where the orphanage was located. Location: a very exquisite small temple stands there. It's quite a quiet place. Are you planning to settle here? Chen Guang got out of the car, looked around, and stretched his body and asked. Actually, you could also be planning to wait here to die. Subai smiled. Have you been to the inpatient department of the cancer hospital? Chen Guang shook his head. I've been there once before. At that time, there were a group of old men wearing patient uniforms sitting there with small stools at the entrance of the inpatient department. I can't forget that scene to this day. Sentimentality is not your style, Chen Guang said. This orphanage looks so familiar. You recognize it? Yes, I recognize it. Chen Guang did not continue, but can we wait for the next batch of trains? Isn't our hope still pinned on her? Maybe the 500 black coffins buried in the middle of the mountain appeared in Subai's mind again. Maybe, she doesn't need her help. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 973. Subai went to the orphanage first and saw Jixiang and Ruyi crawling there. These two cats actually found themselves here from Shanghai. This still surprised Subai. It's not that these two cats don't have that ability, it's just that they behave very lazy most of the time, especially Jixiang. Moreover, Subai was convinced that Jixiang and Ruyi should be able to feel the changes in the world. In other words, it was very dangerous for them to walk outside casually in reality. It could be seen that Jixiang was in a very low mood now. Subai squatted down beside him and reached out to touch Jixiang's head. Jixiang glanced at Subai and turned his head slightly to avoid Subai, as if he had no energy to fight with Subai. The white one will be killed by touching his head. Subai saw the plastic bag on the ground, picked it up, took out a bag of milk from it, bit into it and drank it. While drinking, Subai raised his head slightly, took a deep breath, and said, "It's coming soon. It should be coming soon. I'll get him out of there." Miao Jixiang responded. Chen Guang and Fatty were discussing something not far away. It was obvious that Fatty was moved. Indeed, it was difficult for Fatty to face such temptation with his character. He was like a squirrel preparing for the winter, and he liked to keep going. Find food to hide. In fact, sometimes Subai was quite envious of Fatty's Joe baby spirit, which could at least keep him in a state of preparing to do things or doing things. Jixiang looked like he was going to continue crawling here for a while, so Ruyi naturally followed Jixiang. The two black cats traveled across half of China to find them, and Subai was able to let them go. Without greeting the busy fat man, Subai came to the door of the small temple first. This was indeed a very exquisite small temple. Its exquisiteness was not reflected in its solemnity and dignity as a temple, but in its livability. At least, Subai could see that when designing this temple, the presence of the three different worship halls was really low, and more space and facilities were used as areas for leisure and relaxation. Also, whether it is a Buddha, a fat man, or a monk, once they have reached this level, it is obviously unrealistic for them to continue to maintain their original piety. Subai just walked into the living room, which was larger than the three worship halls combined. He poured himself a glass of wine at the bar and took a sip, thinking to himself that this was definitely not a special bar with a religious theme. "You're back." Subai turned around and saw Sunar, who had just walked in. "Well, I'm back." Subai poured Sunar a glass of wine. It seemed that Sunar had just returned from practicing. His body was heavy with sweat and dust, but he was in good spirits. "I'm going to Lhasa the day after tomorrow. I've been here for 3 days, and I just wanted to wait for you to come back and tell you," Sunar said after taking a sip of wine. "Have a good time." The two of them don't talk much now, and Subai has never thought about keeping Sunar bound here. Of course, if she is willing to stay here for protection, Subai will definitely agree, but obviously, Sunar still thinks about it. Use what may be the last period of your life to go out and see and experience more. If you go to Lhasa, you can. Before Subai finished speaking, he saw a person walking out of the floor-to-ceiling window. If he wasn't Buddha, who could he be? Say CAO is here. Subai smiled and continued, ask Lord Fo to make arrangements. Sunar nodded and did not refuse the kindness. Is that Chen Guang here again? Lord Buddha came in and nodded to Sunar without saying hello. He knew Sunar, but Sunar didn't have the qualifications to be on an equal footing with him. He was only polite to Sunar out of consideration. In Subai's face. Yes, invite Fatty to find some stone man with him, the incarnation of Emperor Wang. You can go too if you are interested. Haha, I'm not very interested. I'm going to retreat recently, and I should be able to break through to another level. Buddha came out this time and gained a lot from Shifang Luhan Temple, and in this environment, there is nothing more important than breakthrough. Sunar will go to Lhasa the day after tomorrow, please make arrangements, Subai said. Yeah, no problem, Buddha agreed. You guys chat, I'm going to take a shower. Sunar left consciously, because she knew that she was really under a lot of pressure between these two people, and it was difficult to have anything in common. After Sunar left the living room, Foy took out his mobile phone and placed it on the bar. There is something wrong with the mobile phone. It's an inexplicable problem. It's broken, Subai asked. Buddha shook his head, it feels weird, like I'm infected with a virus, but it doesn't look like it. Subai also took out his mobile phone and looked at it. He didn't find anything wrong with his mobile phone. Of course, it may be because his mobile phone often breaks down and he often changes his mobile phone, so the feeling is not very obvious. It happened that a WeChat message was sent at this time. Subai clicked on it and it was a voice message. Do you have time? The voice belonged to Hills. Subai called back a voice message to the other party, and the person on the other end quickly answered, my holy robe has been polished, and I have also repaired the formations inside. Let's make an appointment and let's do it again. There are not many people in the West who are qualified to fight with me. Advanced, Subai asked. Haha, I'm lucky. I successfully comprehended it in the ancient battlefield. Now I'm an advanced listener. Hill seemed to be showing off deliberately, which made Subai recall the time when the two of them were at the place of enlightenment. A picture of him showing off to himself while eating instant noodles. If you don't have enlightenment, you will still die. Hills took a deep breath. Su, can I understand that you are jealous? Hwa hwa hwa. There was a noisy sound of electricity coming from the mobile phone. Subai frowned slightly. The signal was not good. Soon, the sound of electricity began to disappear, and Hills's voice became clear again. Damn, it must be that thing, it's monitoring us, Hills said angrily. This feeling made him even more angry than Subai's faint mocking of him just now. What on earth is it? Subai looked at Buddha when he asked. He remembered that Buddha had just said that there was something wrong with his mobile phone. I also heard from a senior person that he is mechanically enhanced and has the ability to enter the internet with his own consciousness. It is an additional ability. He said that a strange consciousness has appeared on the internet recently, and he is doing things with his own emotions. Not man-made. He said it was not man-made, because such cases are now occurring frequently in areas with internet coverage around the world. That consciousness is fighting crime and maintaining social order. I even suspect that if those nuclear powers press that button now, they may not be able to detonate nuclear bombs. You know, even an advanced listener with this kind of enhancement cannot have the consciousness to monitor and handle accidents all over the world with the help of the internet. This can only show that an independent consciousness has been born in the internet area. It sounds a bit like the Terminator, Subai joked. This may just be a data error, or it may be an accident, but, Su, I think this may be inevitable. When society develops, Oh no, when technological information civilization develops to a certain extent, artificial intelligence that is independent of human control will be born. So, it seems that you have made a lot of discoveries recently. Hills clearly understood the meaning behind Sudbai's guess. So, this may be the reason why broadcasting has abruptly transformed the attributes of our world into the attributes of the technological civilization plane. Sudbai expressed his guess. Because it itself may have been born this way. Hills took a sip of whiskey on the other end of the phone. Maybe, I don't know how many years ago, after the technological civilization of a certain world reached a terrifying height, an artificial intelligence similar to that in the Terminator series was born. It became the rule and dominated everything, not only through the network, but also beyond the network. Its method no longer relied on mechanical creatures to provide its own doing things, has become a kind of thought, a kind of master, and a kind of supreme. Then, just like when a human country becomes powerful, it naturally begins to annex the surrounding areas. It is no longer satisfied with just dominating one world, and has formed rules similar to those of today's broadcasts, and has begun to forcibly distort and change world after world. It has caused other worlds to embark on the path of development of scientific and technological civilization. The consciousness that is now born is likely to be the initial form of broadcasting, so its behavior can also be called laying eggs. Sudbai answered. This is just my guess. Of course, I can't guarantee whether it is true, and we don't need to guarantee it. But thinking that the great broadcaster is also instinctively doing things similar to human mating and reproduction, I find it very interesting. Ordinary pornographic prisoners are women or men, but broadcasting is a bit more advanced. It rapes a world. Ha 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 ha, forcing a world to be pregnant with its seed. By the way, I also discovered some special things at the ancient battlefield site this time. Yes. Sudbai took another sip of red wine and waited for Hills to tell. I found some clues that were very pointing. That is, more than 2,000 years ago, Alexander the Great sent a message, or a signal, to the Eastern Empire, but I don't know whether that signal was sent to the Zhou royal family or to the previous generations of emperors of the Qin dynasty. Send a message. Yes, I haven't completely deciphered it now, and the information I got is very fragmentary, but the information should have coordinates and time nodes marked. I don't know which position the coordinates point to. If the time is deciphered correctly, it should be in the past few years. The time is just a rough estimate, not an exact time. I don't know if your Qin dynasty's first emperor finally received this message or made any arrangements. Sudbai's fingers tapped lightly on the bar table. Possible. I already understand something. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 974. Sudbai had met the first emperor. Well, if that kind of thing could be considered as just relying on the memory from a third-person perspective. He was a hero with a broad mind. However, Sudbai was now more interested in Alexander the Great. Perhaps it was due to the sense of mystery. After all, cultural differences and historical habits were what most Chinese people had been influenced by since childhood. Education certainly knows more about the first emperor than that Alexander the Great. Moreover, the great emperor once taught the radio play, and calculated the coordinates of the location where the next broadcast would conquer the world, and also roughly guessed the time when the broadcast would be moved. This is obvious. The first emperor must have received that broadcast. A message came from the emperor, and arrangements were made based on this information. This is a war that has not yet ended, a war that has lasted for more than 2,000 years, and the final outcome of the battle will be decided in that world. A person's thinking is determined by the position of his butt, and buttocks. For example, Sudbai now certainly hopes that the 500 coffins buried in that world will wake up and wipe out Lichi and the others. Such a broadcast will definitely slow down the listener destruction plan and give yourself more love for the trash it was meant to throw away. And once he attains enlightenment, Subai will also face the power of 500 evil stars. At that time, in order for him to survive, his stance will definitely be completely different from before. However, now is not the time to worry about such things. The food must be eaten one bite at a time and the road must be walked step by step. The next morning, Subai walked out of the small temple after washing up and lay down on the wicker chair at the door. Maybe the shortcoming of the scenery here is that there are no rivers. There are only a few creeks in the distance and one mixed with a lot of sand. Small river. No matter how beautiful or spectacular the mountain scenery is, it is static after all, so the ancients paid more attention to the style of mountains and water. When Subai walked out of the bedroom, he saw Jixiang and Ruyi crawling on the bar. The two cats also came back from the door of the orphanage. These days, not only humans but also cats have to learn to accept reality. Fatty and Chen Guang left here last night. Anyway, with Subai and Foye guarding the temple and the orphanage, nothing will happen. Besides, Fatty is also very interested in the so-called Zhang Xianzong's treasure. In fact, before Zhang Xianzong's treasure was officially identified, it had been scattered several times due to engineering, construction and other reasons. Most of them were picked up by nearby people who were watching. No one is stupid these days. Everyone knows the truth about antiques in the golden age of troubled times. Therefore, even if the local government departments later searched and searched, they could only recover part of it. A stone cow versus a stone tiger, gold is worth 1,050. Whoever knows the difference will buy all the Chengdu mansion. This is a nursery rhyme in Sichuan, indicating that the legend of Zhang Xianzong's treasure has been circulating in the local area. There must have been many over the years. Guys like Captain Touching Gold come and go here to search for things. This is a bit like the Qin terracotta warriors and horses in Lintung. Before Lao Yang discovered the terracotta warriors and horses, many people in the area were used to looking for some scattered objects and then reselling them. However, the great movement was not over yet. The domestic antique market has not yet emerged, so the scale is not very large. What are you thinking about? Buddha walked out shirtless. He got up much earlier than Subai. He should have gone to morning classes just now. I want treasure. Subai put his hands behind his neck and said. Haha. Buddha smiled and said, I will start retreat tonight. Okay, I'll help you protect the law. There is no need for thanks and other courtesy between two people. By the way, can the 500 coffins you mentioned last night really be able to successfully awaken them? Last night, Subai shared the information he got from recording books with Fatty and Lord Buddha. The reason why Fatty couldn't wait to dig out stone men with Chen Guang was also inspired by this news. After all, everyone's probability of survival has been invisibly improved because of this news. I hope the arrangement of the two great emperors will not disappoint us. Subai could only answer like this, because Lu Sheng did not give himself a clear method. Perhaps, what Lu Sheng wanted to do was to use his own words to if this matter is publicized, then all the advanced listeners who still exist will subconsciously work in that direction. This is also a force that cannot be ignored. By the way, I want to take a look at that suit of armor again. Subai stood up and walked into the small temple. When he came out, he was carrying a set of dark black armor with many talisman stickers on it, which has a certain suppressive effect. What's wrong? Buddha said, a little surprised. You want to use it? You can't rely on this primitive fighting method to fight in the future, right? Yes, but this one is not that easy to use. Buddha's palm touched the armor. I have observed and studied this armor in the past few days since you left. Although the sealed consciousness was consumed by the failure of the last attack on you, Huge was sealed again by the armor, but he was not completely annihilated. If you use this set of armor, you have to be mentally prepared for the backlash, and most of the energy of this set of armor is now on the seal. Once you wear it, if the battle armor on the body suffers too much trauma, the seal inside will naturally become unstable. In short, if you are fighting in a downwind situation, the effect will be almost the same whether you wear the set of armor or not. But if you are fighting with even strength or even facing a stronger first-line opponent, wearing this set of armor is equivalent to doing yourself a favor. A time bomb is bound to it. Then, is there any way to destroy the thing in Kuei's house? Or separate it from him, Subai asked. Unless it is in a story world, and that story world must have the right time, place, and people, otherwise, if you release this thing rashly, unless it is a big-name audience, the high-level audience will really not be enough in front of him. You see, Buddha said truthfully. Is it really useless? Subai tapped on his helmet helplessly. A good thing is placed in front of you, but you can't use it. This is the most uncomfortable thing. It would be better to let yourself not get it, but it will not be so unwilling to do so. Meow. At this moment, a cat meow came from behind Subai. It was only 8 o'clock in the morning, and two black cats, Jixiang and Ruyi, ran out, apparently about to go out. Don't run around, be careful of accidents, Subai shouted to Jixiang Ruyi. Meow, Jixiang replied to Subai. It was obvious that Subai's warning was not taken seriously. Lord Buddha, do me a favor, drive out and buy some milk and come back. Subai squatted down in front of Jixiang. Although this black cat has the strength of an advanced audience, it is not absolutely safe. It is not that he is worried about Jixiang. The danger of encountering other dirty things is the most terrifying now, but it is the advanced listeners. In today's general environment, almost all high-end listeners are red-eyed and will not let go of anything valuable in front of them. Okay, I'll go, I happen to have to go to the county town to do something, Buddha directly agreed and walked down the mountain. Be back before 10 o'clock, Subai reminded apologetically. Buddha was stunned for a moment, and then he thought of Jixiang's habit of giving the little guy a bag of milk at 10 o'clock every morning when he was at Lao Fang's house, and he immediately agreed. After the Buddha left, Subai stood in front of the armor again, took a deep breath, and exhaled heavily. It was really a pity. When he advanced to the advanced audience, he almost invested all his family wealth, so now he has nothing. The foreign objects that can be used, such as Buddha's hatchet and Kilo's Buddhist beads, also include Fatty's wooden sword. Magical weapons can be improved along with the improvement of the user's realm, especially natal weapons. In the beginning, Buddha's hatchet was not a magic weapon at all. It was just that he had to chop wood every day when he was punished as a child. It's just a tool, but now, that hatchet is no less than a high-level magic weapon. The same is true for the Buddhist beads of monks. Although the relics of eminent monks are rare in the world, they are by no means unique. However, the Buddhist beads in the hands of monks have such power because they have been infiltrated and cultivated by monks along the way. Nowadays, unless Subai obtains a super-grade magic weapon, he will not be able to use it smoothly even if he just finds a good magic weapon. This situation has become more and more obvious recently. Too often, just being able to rely on your body to fight hand-to-hand is indeed very limiting. Ruyi actually jumped on the armor at this time, as if he was very interested in the armor, looking around and touching it. Jixiang sat next to him very dignifiedly, looking at Ruyi with a little disdain, as if he was watching a relative from the countryside who has never seen the world. At this time, Ruyi suddenly got into the armor. Next moment, Subai saw the talisman on the armor began to tremble. You must know that although Ruyi looks like just a cat, it is actually a monster beast at the beginning of the advanced audience. Subai immediately stretched out his hand to hold down the armor, and Ruyi immediately jumped out of the armor, staring at the armor with bright eyes. Hee hee. A faint soul message came out, and then disappeared. Subai's face darkened. He knew clearly that this was the armored man giving him a warning and declaring his sovereignty at the same time. However, this guy was suppressed by the seal so much that he could only send out this message and then was pressed again. Go down. You are crazy, Subai said as he looked at the suit of armor. Then, Subai seemed to have thought of something, A smile appeared on his lips. He reached out and lifted the suit of armor directly, facing the orphanage on the opposite hill. Chen Ryu said that unless the big-name audience enters and relies on their own strength to fight for more than 50% of the probability of falling, they will have time to rescue the little guy when breaking through the orphanage formation. Ding ding ding. Subai tapped his fingers on the armor. One of the 500 evil stars of the great Qin dynasty in the past. It should be qualified, right?